Toshi, Mom, and I were in a bookstore. The ceiling was very high and the bookshelves were all kinds of shapes, stacked all the way to the ceiling. Green vines spiraled down the shelves and through the books. I couldn't read any, so it was more like visiting an art gallery than the bookstore. I browsed until I found a section with lots of pictures. One book drew me in and Toshi made me buy it because I wasn't going to. The picture books of Kawanabe Kyosai is now among my favorite possessions. The Meiji Restoration is the era associated with the modernization and westernization of Japan. This meant that all aspects of Japanese culture that would turn away the affection of the West were either hidden or criminalized. Brothels closed their doors, samurai cut their ponytails, and the geisha were suspended until we could figure out what they actually did. Kawanabe Kyosai was a painter who mocked the ideals of cleanliness, beauty, and chastity that were becoming the expected performance of the time, and he was arrested 3 times for his art. That afternoon I was going to go meet my friend Jupiter. Jupiter quit his IT job and came to Canada to study acting. He fully committed to it and said yes to everything. He was even willing to be in some of my stupid movies. Jupiter is now a professional actor living in Tokyo. Okay, so I'm going to read some sections from the journal I was keeping while I was in Japan. Yeah. In the afternoon, we met with Jupiter. I got lost on the way, but it was great because I got to have fun asking people for directions. Mostly cute girls. I know it's the most overplayed thing to say, but Japan has a huge density of attractive women. Everywhere I look, I see one. I felt unattractive because I'm large and sweaty and don't speak the language and am hairier than the people here. Jupiter took us to Ueno. I said, it's like Disneyland. It was a huge market street full of noises. Everything was colorful. Jupiter pointed at a shop and asked if I knew what it was. Porn? I said. He explained that you go in, select 5 from an enormous wall of porn, then they give you a room with a TV and lock the door. That's Disneyland, he said. Kyosai's art is in many ways ugly. The people have ugly faces and bodies, the men are knobbly kneed and old, and the women either have double chins and saggy rolls of fat, or are so thin their ribs show through their torsos. Sometimes there will be characters who almost look like they could be pretty, such as the girl on page 66, but with characters like these it seems almost purposeful that he'll give them a flaw. She has this masculine nose bridge that looks out of place, where if there was just a subtle line of shadow hinting at a petite feminine nose, she might be perfect. They are not just ugly in appearance, but also ugly in behavior. They seem shamelessly simian, base, and ignoble. People don't just sit placidly, but wear contorted faces of passion, fear, lust, sadistic glee, or any sin of the flesh you can imagine. There is an innate sexuality to Kyosai's art. He often draws huge piles of people in close proximity, sometimes naked to their bare flesh, or musculature, or nervous tissue, or even to their bones. They look as though they are indefinitely wanting, striving to satiate themselves without ever a lucid moment or self-reflection. It's not just the people, but the art itself also has this magnetic, energetic ugliness. There's a scrawling, doodling quality that seems to pay no mind to composition or emphasize any subject, but rather try to fit as many subjects as possible in one frame. This is because pretty is simple and ugliness is complex. It's why people look great in the dark. It's why people like fill lights. They eliminate harsh shadows and get rid of all the contours and details of the face. Like this fill light here. It's why those softening filters exist. A neat room is simpler than an untidy room. Kyosai's art is undeniably skillful, but it would be hard to make the argument that it is pretty or beautiful. This is because it's real. The people are about as weird looking as average people are, and their lives are about as chaotic, desperate, and grasping as ours. The next morning, we went to a cool park where the cicadas were deafening. They had a temple where Toshi explained that they take donations and then your prayers will be heard. I said it sounds like a scam, but I regretted saying it so much after that I've donated to every shrine I've passed. We saw a young sumo wrestler on our tour of the Bay. They worked him very hard. He kept having to spar with fresh opponents, and there was a moment when he was completely buckling under the pressure. He yelled as he pushed the hands of the bigger man and sent a striking push of his own. He kept yelling until he lost again. His name was Yugo. I was thinking about Yugo as I ran up the steps of the Nagano mountain shrine. We took the last bus there, and creamy evening light shafts were occasionally able to penetrate the thick, misty forest. The sun goddess hid in a cave until 5 gods got her out. There were 5 shrines, one for each. Japanese cedars, hundreds of years old, lined the path. Small statues of gods looked somber through the blue forest, fading into the mist. At that time of day, there was no one else there. It was the first silence of the trip. Somewhere in the blue mist, a priest started a slow drum beat that was echoed by the rustling leaves. Change is a theme of Kyosai's art. He drew landscapes, but compared to other traditional Japanese landscape artists, there is a clear difference. Everything he draws is in motion. Usually not just one thing in motion, but full, dynamic frames with a sparkle or a rhythm keeping them alive. His reality is always changing, moving. The old is always falling down as the new surpasses it, only to grow old and be surpassed by another. It's hard as a Westerner not to notice the Western elements in his art, and how strangely he uses them. He often draws characters that look like Western anatomy diagrams. In fact, he also draws Western anatomy diagrams. He draws these very anatomically correct looking skeletons, but they're not just standing there. They're in motion. This is what first attracted me to his art, seeing these normally static, sedentary things in states of absolute excitement, elation, exhaustion, glee, and sorrow. I even tried to draw some myself, but I couldn't achieve the same sort of personality he could. I can't help but look at this as some sort of rebellion, taking the foreign artifacts of an invading culture and stripping them literally to their bare bones, then putting them in the exact same crowded, ugly, chaotic orgy of writhing bodies that he puts everyone else in. It's like he's saying, yes, we're dirty peasants, but take away the coat ruffles and perfume, and you are too. In the latter half of the trip, there was a typhoon, and we had to skip some of the spots we were traveling to and stay with Toshi's grandma for a few days. Baba lives in a little town called Hamada, which is so out of the way that Jupiter said we might be the first Canadians to ever go there. It's a typical Japanese country town, a lot of abandoned houses, almost everyone is old, and despite being very welcoming and beautiful, there's an unshakable melancholy, like the void left by the declining birth rate and the metropolitan migration is a breathable, tangible thing. Baba was an amazing woman. She was the healthiest 85-year-old I'd ever seen. I asked her how she stayed so healthy, expecting some sort of tips for longevity. She said, "Japan has a lot of old people, so if we weren't healthy, it would be a lot more work for the young people." There's a strength in the countryside that goes deeper than the striving, grasping, social climbing work ethic of the city that I'm used to. The strength of community. In the tourist traps, and the big cities, and the places modeled after and designed to impress people of my culture, I felt unfashionable, large, awkward, and unattractive. I'd studied Japanese for a year before the trip, and thought I'd have a chance to practice, but being in Japan, all I ever said was, "Arigatou gozaimashita," 200 times per day. The politeness was a shield. Hamada was where I had my first real conversation of the trip. I was alone, filming a shot for the film I was working on, and a little girl very impolitely approached me and asked, "Why are you playing with a bus ticket?" We talked a bit, then she decided I was boring and ran away. It was in Hamada that I really started to understand Kawanabe Kyosai and his art. Just like in the city, I was still unfashionably, awkwardly, sweatily, and ignobly human. But in Hamada, it was okay, because everyone else was too and they didn't try to hide it. Kyosai wasn't a dismal, pessimistic artist who portrayed the worst in humanity. He was deeply an optimist, to say look how awful we are, yet still we care for each other. He posits that it is not the denial of our shortcomings, but our authenticity in accepting them that is the necessary antidote to our striving, our wanting, our lust, our ugliness. I have this drawing of Baba. That's her sitting there. Then outside it's raining, and then there's the typhoon on the TV. So this is the last journal entry I wrote while I was in Japan. I haven't been writing in here because it's hard not to feel like I'm playing a character when writing about real experiences. Crafting a fiction, I can slide smoothly into a mask, but that practice has ill prepared me for simple truth. Therefore, writing here is uncomfortable. I don't have the tools to relate a real experience. I will try, nonetheless, by stating as simply as possible facts. We are currently riding the bullet train to Shin, Osaka. From there, we'll catch a train to Tokyo, where we'll fly back home. Last night was my last night in Japan, and today has been my last morning. This trip has been meaningful, if for no other reason, because self-reflection commonly follows a dramatic change in one's daily habits. I've had to reflect on my relationships with Toshi, my mom, and on my pursuits artistically. Toshi has taught me to judge less and to worry less about the judgment of others. From time spent with my mom, I've learned my profound affection for her and to be a better caretaker. Artistically, I've learned not to stay too faithful to plans. The best shots for this film came with a very clear equation. The shorter the time spent between inspiration and execution, the better the product. This film shines at the points where I followed my creative instinct immediately and didn't stick to the plan. But was this trip more than a mere stimulus for self-reflection? Last night, I was standing on a bridge watching the sunset with Mom. We'd walked the streets for 20 minutes looking for a place from which the sun would actually be visible, so by the time we found the bridge, the day was already loosing its final wet coughs of death, and the fan of sunbeams just peeking out from the river were like the twitching claw of a dying man, fighting for a hold on the mortal plane. I cheered him on, to my surprise. That was when I really realized that my time in this country was, for now, over. I realized I didn't want the sun to go down. I didn't want this little life we'd created here, so expensive and unsustainable, to end. I didn't want to leave this land of contradictions, where shameless vice and vulgarity leak through the floodgates of suffocating conformity, where the old gives way graciously to the new, and the new does its best, in a return of grace, to remember the old. Where beauty and imagination are everywhere, in everything is a well-composed picture, a flower pot, advertisement, window, menu, train station, book cover, or pair of shoes, not asking to be noticed, but noticed and cared for nonetheless. This land, full of its unique, silent beauty, which does not designate beauty to only things that might make money from it and leave all else ugly. I did not and still don't want to leave this land. Writing this, I find that I wish Baba could read it, though I don't know how she would. I wish she could see how her island home has been noticed and appreciated, as if that could be small compensation for all the good she did me. Baba, as if you're reading this, you showed me a new way to be old, and I will try my best to emulate it. And while I'm doing thank yous, Jupiter, thank you for being one success story in a million, which is just enough for me to keep following my dreams. Thank you, Japan.